mother collapses in the courtroom as her son's fate is sealed. A politician beats the charges only to find himself back in handcuffs. Texan bank robber Rebecca Bradley Rogers sits unfazed, indifferent, while weighing an insanity plea. And the notorious Matt Killer Kimes is arraigned in front of thousands of curiosity seekers. July 1927 shows that the final act of a heist wasn't always the getaway car. Sometimes it was Lady Justice's gavel. With that, we turn to the Indianapolis Times, July 12, 1927 story, Mother of Bandit Collapses in Court, subtitled, Two Sentenced for Lapel State Bank Robbery. Mrs. David Goodnight, who was noted as the invalid mother of Robert Goodnight, only 26, indeed collapsed in circuit court when her son, along with Howard Wood, who was only 21, were sentenced for the heist at Lapel State Bank that occurred on May 28th. Both Goodnight and Wood were locals from Elwood, Indiana, and both were sentenced to 10 years in the state reformatory. Both confessed to the heist that scored them somewhere between $3,000 and $3,700. And we covered the Lapel State Bank heist in the June 1927 Quick Hitters video that was north of the Mason-Dixon edition. What happened was, on June 2nd, Goodnight had been captured and was being held in Madison County Jail in Anderson, Indiana. Wood at that point was on the lam and was supposed to have somewhere around $3,100 on him. 2 days later, that amount was updated to just over $3,300. On the 10th of June, Sheriff Frank Daniels brought in a man named Valley Blair, who was a cigar clerk. They brought him in for questioning. At the same time, they released a man named Deal Phillips, who was a suspect, but he was able to prove that he'd been out of town at the time of the heist. He did offer that he knew Goodnight was a barber. The Sunday Star, June 17 edition, brought us Freed Lawmaker Faces New Charge of Robbery. It was subtitled, Michigan State Representative Charges Political Frame-Up in Court Proceedings. So it's a good news, bad news story. Good news, Chester A. Good, state representative from Highland Park, Michigan, was acquitted on July 16th on one charge of armed robbery. That was for the Highland Park branch of the Peninsula State Bank that was hit on October 26, 1926. Bad news, he was immediately rearrested on a second similar charge for a robbery at the Highland Park branch of the Peninsula State Bank on August 9, 1926. Clarence Rayo and Albert Bubbas accused Good of complicity for that October holdup and noted that he was involved in both heists. Good, a politician, denied the accusation, made himself the victim, and claimed a political, quote, frame-up, end quote. Now, we just covered that story in the June 1927 Part 1 video. Good had been arrested and charged with 4 branch bank holdups, totaling over $30,000. Apparently, 2 unnamed accomplices stated that Good had planned 2 of the 4 heists. The July 12 Indianapolis Times brought us Insanity Plea May Save Girl. This was subtitled Rebecca Rogers Unconcerned as Trial Opens. Story takes us to San Marcos, Texas, where we reunite with Rebecca Bradley Rogers. And we see that her lawyers were implementing or strongly considering implementing the insanity plea. Now, her mental state was pointed to as she appeared to be unconcerned as the proceedings were taking place. Testimony was set to begin that day, July 12th. Yet Rebecca, quote, chatted gaily with reporters and friends, end quote. Bank robbery in Texas was punishable by death. Now, her husband, Otis M. Rogers, had been ill with tuberculosis, but he was actually set to testify in his wife's defense. So now we turn to the Brownsville Herald. One day later, Becky Rogers and husband meet again. We see that the trial had been continued and transferred yesterday, meaning July 12th, from San Marcos to what appears to be La Grange. Now, Rebecca at this point was in Austin, Texas, and was able to meet with her husband, who just left the tuberculosis sanitarium near San Angelo. So it seems that while the trial was being continued, that they were going to be reunited and able to be near one another. He was going to be back in the sanitarium, and she was going to be back to work, apparently out on bond, working as a stenographer. The New Britain Daily Herald helped clarify a little bit with their story, Cannot Obtain Jury, subtitled, As a Result, a change of venue has been granted in case of Rebecca Rogers in Texas. Quote, inability to find men willing to inflict the death penalty on a woman, end quote, led to the continuance and transfer of the trial. They actually interviewed 19 prospective male jurors. They were called and they were dismissed because they declared they would hesitate to inflict the death penalty. And note that women did not sit on juries in Texas at that time. In the December 1926 main story, we actually covered 10 different editions over 7 newspapers that highlighted the Buda, Texas armed heist when Rebecca Bradley Rogers entered a bank as a pretend newspaper writer. It was a monstrous story that is amazing and even included arson charges. In January of 1927, we followed up with a story that focused on her mother in court, and it's at that point that I wondered aloud, was she crazy? In March of 1927, we followed up again, and this included information on legal wranglings that seemed to begin the discussion of utilizing the insanity plea. And in May of 1927, in a follow-up video, we touched on Rebecca Bradley Rogers' arson trial and noted that it had been delayed due to her husband's ill health. Not to be outdone by that many editions, July's coverage of Matthew Kimes included articles from July 1st to July 29th and utilized 15 editions. Now, we have covered his story numerous times and followed up on old details and described new heists and murders throughout the Southwest with videos in February, March, April, May, and June of 1927. We've covered the Kimes gang, aka the Kimes-Terrill gang, which ran roughshod throughout the Southwest. Well, here we are July 1st with the Coconino Sun, and we see the story Kimes and Katie taken back to Oklahoma. Latter is Ray Doolin, a supposed member of Kimes' gang of bank bandits and murderers. Well, we see some great photographs of Doolin, Kimes, and Sheriff Parsons. And we also see an odd pose of Mrs. Doolin and Kimes together. The enormous story went from page 1 to page 3 and covered details on the mechanics of the capture of Kimes. It included quotes from witnesses, quotes from posse members and other law enforcement, and gave an actual blow-by-blow of the fight between Kimes and Sheriff Parsons in the car, which included the gunplay. This comes from the perspective of Parsons, which differs somewhat from the story that we covered specifically in a June 1927 video titled, Kimes Captured at Grand Canyon, So He Jumped. Their page 5 had a society section, and in it included a story on popular people, in this case, Matt Kimes. Kimes reaches Oklahoma City. This story kind of provided a trail for him. So we see that he arrived at the state capitol at 6:45 on Wednesday evening, June 29th. He was in the custody of Sheriff John Russell, who we've mentioned before, of Okmulgee, Oklahoma, along with 2 deputies. And he was there to face Charles Worley of the State Bureau of Identification. Once done, Sheriff Russell, Matt Kimes, and the 2 deputies were headed back down to Okmulgee for Kimes' arraignment for his connection to the murder of Police Chief McNally during the Beggs, Oklahoma double heist that we just recently covered in May 1927's Main Stories video titled Pretend Priest, Midget, and Killer Kimes. The July 1 Evening Star brought us Outlaw is viewed by crowd of 4,000. Was subtitled Notorious Southwest Bandit appears twice, guarded by 10 sheriffs. Indeed, Kimes made 2 public appearances, quote, to gratify the curiosity of some 4,000 persons, end quote. Hundreds had, in fact, quote, besieged the jail in an effort to see him, end quote. Well, Kimes was surrounded by 10 sheriffs when he was brought out from the county jail into Courthouse Square. This first appearance was unannounced, but the crowd started to grow and eventually grew to approximately 2,000 people. Hands manacled, Kimes was at one point helped up to a window ledge in full view of the spectators. Well, he shifted awkwardly on his feet and merely grinned when some people in the crowd started to cry, quote, speech, speech, end quote. Well, that didn't stop him from pleading not guilty at his arraignment that day. That same day's Douglas Daily Dispatch ran Oklahoma Bandit embarrassed before a crowd. And it retold most of the same details from those of the Evening Star, but it did add that Kimes was, quote, embarrassed as a schoolboy speaking his first piece, end quote. And they noted that when he was led out of the courtroom, it was, quote, into the eye of a motion picture camera, end quote. Does that film exist? Lastly, Kimes removed his broad-rimmed hat when he was told that a woman in the crowd requested that he do so. Well, the Imperial Valley Press from July 6 ran a photo under a caption, 7 murders charged to him. This indeed had a picture of Kimes cuffed to Doolin, accompanied by Mrs. G.H. Cady. And this picture was taken in front of the Flagstaff, Arizona jail. Kimes must face murder charge. It noted that both Kimes and Doolin were given preliminary hearings on July 6, that neither were allowed bail, and both pleaded guilty. The New Britain Daily Herald on July 7th ran a pictorial page. There were amazing images of a train wreck, of a record sea bass caught in Florida, photos of various prominent, important people, at least at the time, and a new image of Sheriff John Russell, along with Kimes and Doolin. And note that Doolin always looks away from the camera. He seems to always look off in the distance. Kimes looks directly at the camera. The Douglas Daily Dispatch on July 12th noted that Governor Henry S. Johnston ordered Matt Kimes to be moved under heavy guard from the state penitentiary at McAllister over to Sallisaw. And that was for the sentencing for the murder of Perry Chocolate, deputy sheriff. We covered the Covington, Oklahoma heists, the running gunfight, and numerous shootouts that resulted in the murder of Deputy Sheriff Chocolate in August of 1926, with the ridiculously long titled video, Candy Kid Executed, American Style of Bank Robbery Exported to Europe, Oklahoma Madness and Mayhem. Well, based on that murder charge, Kimes was to be sentenced to 99 years. And apparently, on the drive over from McAllister to Sallisaw, there were 3 armed guards who were driving in the lead car. You had Kimes in the middle car, and you had 3 armed guards in the follow car. The Evening Star, July 12th, ran Kimes sentenced to life in prison, subtitled Convicted of One Slaying, Outlaw to Face Another Murder Charge Soon. Incidentally, his brother George was already serving 25 years for manslaughter in connection with the same case. But the state wasn't done with Kimes. They were seeking to send him to the electric chair for the McAnally killing. Well, the Douglas Daily Dispatch kept at it, with Oklahoma bad man taken in Arizona gets life term. Originally, Kimes had been found guilty of manslaughter, was sentenced to 35 years, but the case was retried because neither party was satisfied with the 35-year sentence. He was found guilty yet again, but this time he escaped, as they described him in this story, like a wraith. The July 23rd, 1927 New Britain Daily Herald ran this great photo. Here is the famous Kimes gang. And it shows from left to right, Matt Kimes, Jack Whitehead, Clyde Brandon, and Ray Doolin. All four of them were connected to the slaying of Chief of Police McAnally in Beggs, Oklahoma. The Coconino Sun's July 29th edition ran yet another stunning photo of Matt Kimes, chronicling him as he heads to the penitentiary. Well, justice was served, or at least it was in the works. Sometimes it left mothers wailing, and at other times it was politicians crying foul and calling it a witch hunt by his detractors. But for Matt Killer Kimes, the law finally closed in for good. And remember, crime might pay for a moment, but the courtroom always gets the last word. That's neither career nor financial advice. Next time, new quick-hitter heists from around the country and even from Berlin, Germany. Plus, did Rebecca Bradley Rogers inspire another female bank robber? We'll meet Viola Harris, 19, blonde, and cold as ice.